Marcus Walker walked the familiar streets of his neighborhood every morning. He liked the quiet of the early hours, the way the world seemed to slow down before the day officially began. Marcus wasn't one to draw attention. He was just a regular man with a quiet smile, always polite, nodding a friendly greeting to the few early risers he'd pass on his way. For those who knew him, he was simply Marcus, the man who went about his business, never causing trouble, never making a scene. But not everyone saw Marcus in the same light. To most people, he was just another man, another face in the crowd. And for Officer Grant, who patrolled these same streets, Marcus was a convenient target. Officer Grant was known for his arrogance, his smug attitude, and the way he looked down on anyone he considered beneath him. He'd size people up in a glance, deciding in seconds who was worthy of his respect and who wasn't. And to him, Marcus didn't deserve a second look. The first time Officer Grant spotted Marcus, he saw him as a quiet, unassuming man walking alone. Nothing special, nothing important. But something in Marcus's calm manner annoyed Officer Grant. The way he seemed so at ease, so unbothered. It made Grant's blood boil. Maybe it was because Marcus didn't fidget or look away when he passed, or maybe it was because Marcus didn't seem to notice Grant's patrol car, parked deliberately in his line of sight. Whatever the reason, Grant's irritation grew with each passing day. One chilly morning, Officer Grant finally decided to make his move. He drove his car slowly up beside Marcus, rolling down his window and giving him a hard, scrutinizing stare. "Out early, aren't we?" he said, his voice filled with barely disguised contempt. Marcus turned to face the officer, his expression calm, as if they were two strangers passing on the street. "Morning, officer," he replied simply, his voice polite but distant. But Grant wasn't interested in politeness. He wanted to make it clear who was in charge. "Let me see some ID," he demanded, as if Marcus had done something wrong just by existing. Marcus didn't argue. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his ID, and handed it over without a word. He knew better than to argue, especially with someone like Officer Grant. The officer took the ID, holding it up as if inspecting every letter and number. His eyes narrowed, his face tightening as if he were looking for some reason, any reason, to find fault with the man standing before him. "Marcus Walker," Grant read out loud, his tone cold. "You live around here?" "Yes, officer," Marcus replied quietly, "a few blocks down." Grant handed back the ID with a smirk. "Keep it that way," he muttered, as if Marcus had stepped into territory that wasn't his to claim. Then he drove off, leaving Marcus standing there, ID in hand, watching the car disappear down the street. This wasn't the first time Marcus had encountered people like Grant. Men who thought they had a right to decide where he belonged, how he should behave, even what he was allowed to do. He'd faced this kind of treatment more times than he could count. But he had learned over the years not to react, not to let them see what he was feeling inside. Instead, he'd wait, bide his time, and continue with his life, as if nothing had happened. But inside, a fire burned. It was a quiet, steady flame, fueled by years of being underestimated and overlooked. Marcus knew who he was. He knew his own worth, his own strength, and he knew that someday, somehow, people like Grant would see it too. Over the next few weeks, Officer Grant seemed to make it his personal mission to remind Marcus of his place. Every morning, there he was, waiting in his patrol car, watching as Marcus walked by. Sometimes he'd make a comment. Other times he'd just stare, his eyes filled with disdain. Marcus never reacted, always greeting him with the same calm nod, the same polite "good morning, officer." But Marcus's patience didn't go unnoticed. People in the neighborhood saw the way Grant treated him, the way he seemed to single Marcus out for no reason. Some shook their heads in quiet sympathy, but no one dared speak up. They had seen what happened to those who crossed Officer Grant. The man had a way of making life difficult for anyone he didn't like, and no one wanted to become his next target. One morning, Marcus noticed a small group of people gathered near the corner store, whispering among themselves as they watched him pass. He caught bits of their conversation, murmurs about that officer and what he did last week. It seemed that Grant's behavior was finally drawing attention, that people were starting to see through his mask of authority. But even as the whispers grew, Officer Grant continued his routine, oblivious to the change in the air. He was too wrapped up in his own ego, too convinced of his own power to notice that the people he looked down on were beginning to see him for what he truly was. One day, as Marcus was passing the same corner, a young man stopped him. "Hey, Marcus," he said, glancing nervously in the direction of Grant's patrol car. "I don't know how you do it, man. The way he treats you, it's not right." Marcus smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Patience," he replied. "Sometimes, patience is the best response." The young man shook his head, admiration and confusion mixed in his expression. "I don't know how you can stand it. If it were me." But Marcus just nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. He knew that his time would come, that someday Officer Grant would have no choice but to see him for who he really was. And when that day came, it wouldn't be Marcus who felt small and powerless. Every encounter with Grant was a reminder of the life he'd led, of the battles he'd fought quietly, without recognition or praise. He wasn't looking for glory or validation. He simply wanted to live his life with dignity and respect. But the world didn't always make that easy. It seemed that for people like Marcus, every step forward was met with resistance, every success shadowed by someone trying to tear him down. As the days passed, Marcus continued his quiet routine, each morning bringing a new test of patience, a new opportunity to prove to himself that he was stronger than the prejudice around him. He didn't need to fight back with words or anger. He'd learned that his calm, steady presence was enough to unsettle those who sought to belittle him. And in that calmness, he found a power greater than any badge or uniform could provide. Then one morning, something changed. Marcus could feel it in the air, a subtle shift, a tension he couldn't quite place. As he turned the corner onto his usual route, he saw Officer Grant waiting in his car, the same smug expression on his face. But this time, Marcus wasn't alone. A group of people had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold with quiet anticipation. Grant stepped out of his car, his eyes fixed on Marcus with a sneer. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Marcus held his ground, his expression calm as ever. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their silent support giving him strength. This time, he wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for every person who had ever felt the weight of someone else's prejudice, for everyone who had been made to feel less than they were. Grant took a step closer, his voice rising. "People like you think you can just walk around like you own the place, but let me remind you, you don't." For a moment, silence filled the air, thick and heavy. Marcus looked at Grant, his gaze steady, unwavering. And then, with a quiet voice that held more strength than any shout, he replied, "Respect isn't something you demand, officer. It's something you earn." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices a soft echo of Marcus's words. Grant looked around, suddenly aware of the people watching, the shift in their eyes. They weren't looking at him with respect or fear. They were looking at him with disappointment, with disapproval. And for the first time, Grant felt his confidence waver. In that moment, Marcus knew that the power had shifted. He didn't need to raise his voice or fight back. He had already won, simply by standing his ground, by refusing to let someone else's prejudice define him. And as he turned and walked away, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet victory that needed no applause. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden glow over the neighborhood as Marcus made his way down the street. It was one of those quiet mornings where everything felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. For Marcus, these early walks were a time to clear his mind, a small moment of peace before the demands of the day took over. But he could feel that peace slipping away the moment he saw the patrol car parked on the corner. Inside the car, Officer Grant watched him. Marcus could feel the officer's eyes following his every step, a silent reminder that he was being watched, judged. It wasn't the first time he'd felt that stare. In fact, it had become a routine. Every morning, there was Officer Grant, waiting as if he had nowhere else to be, as if Marcus was his only concern. The first few times it happened, Marcus tried to ignore it. He wasn't doing anything wrong after all. He was just a man walking down his own street, minding his own business. But Officer Grant didn't seem to care about that. He seemed to think that Marcus didn't belong there, and he was determined to remind him of that at every opportunity. On this particular morning, as Marcus neared the corner, Officer Grant stepped out of his car, crossing his arms over his chest, with a look that made his feelings clear. Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, tried not to let the officer's gaze affect him. But it was hard to ignore the message behind that stare. "You don't belong here." "Walker," Officer Grant called out, his voice cold and sharp. "Hold up a second." Marcus stopped, turning to face the officer, keeping his posture relaxed. "Morning, officer," he said, his voice polite, respectful. He had learned a long time ago that politeness was often the best shield against people like Grant. But Grant didn't return the greeting. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down, as if he were assessing a problem that needed to be dealt with. "Out for a walk again, I see," he said, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Marcus held his ground, meeting the officer's gaze with a calm expression. "Just getting some fresh air, officer," he replied simply. He didn't add anything more, didn't explain himself. He knew that explaining himself would only make things worse, would only give Grant more power over him. But Grant wasn't satisfied with that. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Seems like you spend a lot of time wandering around," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Makes a man wonder if you've got anything better to do." There was an edge to Grant's words, a challenge hidden beneath the surface. He was waiting for Marcus to react, to give him a reason to take things further. But Marcus knew better. He had dealt with people like Grant before, people who saw him as a target simply because of the color of his skin, because of the way he looked or the way he carried himself. He had learned that reacting only gave them the satisfaction they were looking for. So, instead of reacting, Marcus stayed silent. He met Grant's gaze with a quiet strength, a calm that spoke volumes without saying a word. But Grant didn't see it. He only saw what he wanted to see, a man who was beneath him, a man who didn't belong. The silence stretched between them, heavy and tense. Grant seemed almost frustrated by Marcus's lack of response, his refusal to rise to the bait. Finally, with a sneer, he turned and walked back to his car, muttering something under his breath. Marcus caught only a few words, but they were enough to tell him everything he needed to know. Troublemaker, doesn't belong, waste of time. Marcus watched as the patrol car pulled away, his expression calm, his posture relaxed. But inside, he felt a flicker of anger, a spark that he had to work hard to keep under control. He knew that reacting would only make things worse, would only give Grant more reason to harass him. So he took a deep breath, let the anger fade, and continued on his walk, as if nothing had happened. But as the days passed, Grant's behavior only grew worse. It seemed that every time Marcus stepped outside, there was the patrol car, waiting. And each time, the encounter was the same. Grant would step out, make a comment, throw a look of disdain Marcus's way, as if he were trying to remind him of his place. One afternoon, Marcus decided to stop by the local store on his way home. He picked up a few items, taking his time as he browsed the shelves, trying to shake off the tension from his earlier encounter with Grant. But as he stepped out of the store, he saw the familiar patrol car parked right across the street, and his heart sank. Grant was leaning against the hood, watching him with a smug look that made Marcus's skin crawl. He could feel the officer's eyes on him as he walked across the parking lot, feel the judgment in that gaze, the assumption that he was up to no good. "Walker," Grant called out, stopping Marcus in his tracks. "Where you headed?" Marcus turned, keeping his expression neutral. "Just heading home, officer," he replied. his tone calm. Grant raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing as he looked Marcus over. "Been doing a lot of shopping lately, haven't you?" Marcus knew better than to respond. He could see the trap in Grant's question, the way he was trying to provoke him, to get him to say something that would justify his suspicion. But Marcus had learned to be patient, to keep his cool even when every instinct told him to speak up, to defend himself. So, he said nothing, only giving a polite nod before turning to leave. But as he walked away, he could feel Grant's eyes on him, could hear the faint sound of laughter drifting from the officer's direction. It was a sound that grated on his nerves, that reminded him of every encounter he'd ever had with people who thought they could judge him, who thought they had the right to decide who he was. Over the next few weeks, Grant's behavior became a constant presence in Marcus's life. It didn't matter where he went or what he was doing. Grant was always there, watching, waiting. Sometimes he'd make a comment, a sly remark meant to belittle or humiliate. Other times he'd simply stand there, his gaze heavy with judgment, a silent reminder of his disapproval. Marcus tried to ignore it, tried to carry on with his life as if Grant didn't exist. But it was hard. Every time he stepped outside, he felt a weight on his shoulders, a tension that followed him wherever he went. It was like a shadow, always lurking, always reminding him that he was being watched, being judged. One day, as Marcus was walking home from work, he spotted Grant's car parked just a few blocks from his house. The sight made his stomach twist, made his hands clench into fists at his sides. He didn't understand why Grant was so fixated on him, why he seemed so determined to make his life difficult. But he knew that reacting would only make things worse, would only give Grant more power over him. So, he forced himself to stay calm, to keep his head down and his expression neutral as he walked past the patrol car. But as he passed, Grant stepped out, blocking his path with a smirk that made Marcus's blood boil. "Got a minute?" Grant asked, his tone mocking, as if he knew that Marcus had no choice but to stop. Marcus looked at him, his expression calm despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Is there something you need, officer?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Grant tilted his head, looking Marcus up and down with a sneer. "Just wondering what you're up to, Walker. You seem to spend a lot of time wandering around." Marcus met his gaze, refusing to let the officer's words get to him. "I'm just heading home," he replied, his tone calm. Grant let out a low chuckle, his eyes glinting with a cold amusement. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Because it seems to me like you're always just hanging around." Marcus felt his jaw clench, felt the anger rising inside him like a storm. But he forced himself to stay calm, to keep his expression neutral. He knew that reacting would only give Grant what he wanted, would only give him more reason to continue his harassment. So, he said nothing, only giving a polite nod before stepping around the officer and continuing on his way. But as he walked away, he could hear Grant's laughter echoing behind him, a sound that seemed to cling to him like a shadow, a reminder of the prejudice that followed him wherever he went. Days turned into weeks, and the encounters continued, each one more tense than the last. It was as if Grant had made it his personal mission to remind Marcus of his place, to make sure he understood that he didn't belong, that he would never be anything more than what Grant saw in him. And each time, Marcus faced it with the same calm, the same quiet strength that had become his shield. But inside, he could feel the strain, the toll that each encounter was taking on him. He could feel the anger building, the frustration that came from being constantly underestimated, constantly judged. He knew he had the strength to face it, knew that he could endure whatever Grant threw his way. But there was a part of him, a quiet part that whispered in the back of his mind, that longed for the day when he could finally show the world who he really was. For now, he would continue to be patient, to hold his head high and keep his calm. But deep down, he knew that his time would come, that someday people like Grant would see him for who he truly was. And on that day, he would no longer be the man they thought they knew. He would be someone they could no longer ignore, someone they would have no choice but to respect. Each day, Marcus walked through his neighborhood as usual, keeping to his routine. He liked his routine. It gave him peace. He enjoyed the rhythm of it, the simple act of going about his day without bothering anyone. But no matter what he did, Officer Grant was always there, watching him, making his presence known in small but cutting ways. Grant didn't hide his dislike for Marcus. He was clear about it with every look, every word, and every move he made. One morning, Marcus noticed the patrol car parked right across from his house. Officer Grant sat in the driver's seat, his eyes fixed on Marcus's front door. Marcus could see the smirk on his face, that cold, unfriendly look that seemed to say, "I'm watching you. I know what you are." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest, a feeling he was all too familiar with. It was the feeling of being watched, of being seen as something he wasn't. But he took a deep breath, shook off the tension, and reminded himself that he hadn't done anything wrong. As Marcus stepped out of his house, he nodded at the officer in his usual polite way. "Morning, officer," he said, his voice steady and calm. But instead of responding, Grant just stared, his gaze cold and unforgiving. Marcus knew what the officer wanted. He wanted Marcus to feel uncomfortable, to feel out of place. But Marcus wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. He held his head high and kept walking. It didn't stop there. Each day, Officer Grant seemed to go a little further, finding new ways to remind Marcus of his presence. One afternoon, Marcus was walking back from the corner store with a bag of groceries when he saw Grant's patrol car parked by the side of the road. Grant stepped out, blocking Marcus's path. His eyes scanned the grocery bag, and then he looked at Marcus with that same cold stare. "What's in the bag?" Grant asked, his voice sharp and suspicious. Marcus looked down at the bag, then back at the officer. "Just some groceries," he replied calmly, holding the bag open to show its contents. "Bread, milk, and a few vegetables. Nothing out of the ordinary." Grant frowned, as if disappointed that there was nothing suspicious in the bag, but he didn't move out of the way. Instead, he looked at Marcus and said, "I don't know why you're always wandering around here. People in this neighborhood don't want trouble." Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his expression calm. "I live here, officer," he said. "I'm just going about my day." But Grant didn't seem to care. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "People like you think you can do whatever you want. But I'm here to remind you that's not the case." Marcus felt a flash of anger, but he kept it hidden. He knew that reacting would only make things worse, so he nodded, his face calm and respectful, and continued on his way. But inside, he was counting down the moments. Each word, each insult, was a reminder that someday things would change. Over the next few days, Marcus began to notice more details. He saw how Officer Grant would park his car in different spots around the neighborhood, always in a place where he could see Marcus. Sometimes he would even drive slowly past Marcus's house, his eyes scanning the front yard, as if he were looking for something out of place. Marcus knew what he was doing. He was trying to find any reason, no matter how small, to make trouble. One evening, as Marcus was coming home from work, he saw Grant parked at the end of his street, watching his house. Marcus paused, looking at the patrol car with a calm expression, but inside, he was growing tired of the constant watching, the constant judgment. He knew he had done nothing wrong, and yet, here was this officer, treating him like a criminal. But instead of letting it get to him, Marcus took a deep breath and continued on his way. As he walked past the patrol car, he nodded at Grant, a small, polite gesture that showed he wasn't afraid. He knew that Grant wanted him to feel scared, to feel out of place, but Marcus wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. A few days later, Marcus noticed something interesting. He was sitting on his front porch, enjoying the quiet of the evening, when he saw Grant's patrol car parked nearby. But this time, Grant wasn't looking at Marcus. Instead, he was talking to another man, a man Marcus recognized as one of his neighbors. Marcus watched as the two men spoke, their voices low, their expressions serious. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the way Grant pointed in his direction, the way his neighbor nodded with a look of worry on his face. Marcus felt a pang of frustration. It was clear that Grant was trying to turn his neighbors against him, trying to make them see him as a threat. But Marcus knew his neighbors. He had lived in this neighborhood for years, had shared smiles and greetings with these people. He wasn't going to let Grant's lies change that. As the days went by, Marcus began to notice more signs of Grant's attempts to stir up trouble. He saw how some of his neighbors would glance at him with uncertain looks, how they seemed hesitant to greet him like they used to. He could feel the change in the air, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. But Marcus stayed calm. He knew who he was, and he knew that the truth would come out in time. One evening, as he was walking back from the store, Marcus noticed a flyer posted on a nearby telephone pole. It was a notice for a neighborhood meeting, a gathering for residents to discuss community safety. Marcus couldn't help but feel that the meeting had something to do with him, that it was part of Grant's plan to turn the neighborhood against him. When the day of the meeting arrived, Marcus decided to attend. He walked into the community center, feeling the eyes of his neighbors on him as he took a seat at the back of the room. Officer Grant was there, standing at the front with a confident look on his face. He was speaking to the crowd, his voice loud and clear as he talked about the importance of keeping the neighborhood safe, about the need to watch out for any suspicious behavior. Marcus listened quietly, his face calm, but inside, he felt a growing sense of determination. He could see what Grant was trying to do, see how he was trying to paint him as a threat, as someone who didn't belong. But Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. He knew that he had a right to be there, just as much as anyone else in the room. As the meeting went on, Marcus noticed how some of his neighbors began to shift in their seats, glancing at him with uncertain looks. He could feel the doubt, the hesitation in the room. But he also saw something else, small glimmers of recognition, of understanding. He could see that some of his neighbors weren't entirely convinced by Grant's words, that they were beginning to question his motives. After the meeting, Marcus quietly approached a few of his neighbors, offering a friendly smile and a polite greeting. He could see the hesitation in their eyes, the uncertainty that Grant had planted, but he could also see the warmth, the familiarity that hadn't completely faded. One neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Jenkins, looked at Marcus with a kind but worried expression. "Marcus," she said softly, "I don't know what's going on, but I know you're a good man. I've seen you around here for years. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth that pushed away the coldness of Grant's presence. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," he replied, his voice sincere. "I appreciate that." As he walked home that evening, Marcus felt a renewed sense of strength. He knew that he wasn't alone, that there were people in the neighborhood who saw him for who he truly was. He also knew that Grant's influence was beginning to weaken, that his attempts to turn the neighborhood against him were starting to backfire. The next day, as Marcus was walking through the neighborhood, he saw Grant's patrol car parked nearby. But this time, he didn't feel the same tension, the same unease. He knew that he had people on his side, that he wasn't as isolated as Grant wanted him to feel. As he walked past the patrol car, Marcus noticed Grant watching him, his expression hard and unfriendly. But instead of looking away, Marcus met his gaze, his eyes steady and calm. He could see the frustration in Grant's eyes, the hint of anger at Marcus's refusal to be intimidated. In that moment, Marcus realized something important. He realized that his strength didn't come from fighting back, from reacting to Grant's provocations. It came from his patience, his resilience, his ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. He knew that Grant couldn't take that away from him, no matter how hard he tried. Over the next few weeks, Marcus continued to go about his life with quiet determination. He didn't let Grant's presence affect him, didn't let the officers' sneers and glares get under his skin. Instead, he focused on the things that mattered: his work, his neighbors, the small moments of peace that he cherished. And slowly, he began to notice a change. His neighbors started to greet him with warm smiles again, started to see him not as a stranger, but as a friend. They began to see through Grant's lies, to question the officer's motives. Marcus could feel the shift, a quiet but powerful change that filled him with hope. One evening, as he was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, he heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, he found Mrs. Jenkins standing there, a warm smile on her face. "Marcus," she said, her voice gentle, "I just wanted to say thank you. You've shown us all what it means to be strong. You didn't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Marcus felt a swell of gratitude, a deep sense of peace. He knew that his patience had paid off, that his quiet strength had made a difference, and as he looked out over the neighborhood, he felt a renewed sense of belonging, a feeling that no one, not even Officer Grant, could take away. After weeks of watching and waiting, Marcus felt the time was finally right. He had endured Officer Grant's constant watching, the silent accusations, and the disrespect. Day after day, he had kept his head up, saying nothing, showing no anger. But deep down, Marcus knew he couldn't let this go on forever. He had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to others in the community who might face the same kind of treatment. So, early one morning, Marcus left his house and drove into the city. Today was not just any day. It was a special day for him. But no one in the neighborhood knew that. As he drove, he thought back on everything he had been through, every unfair encounter with Officer Grant, every insult that Grant had thrown his way. And he thought about the strength he had found within himself to stay calm, to wait patiently, even when things were at their worst. Marcus arrived at the precinct building just as the sun was rising. The city streets were still quiet, with only a few people out and about. He parked his car and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Today would be different. Today he was no longer just Marcus, the quiet man in the neighborhood. Today he was someone else entirely. As he entered the building, the familiar sights and sounds of the precinct greeted him. Officers were busy at their desks, typing away at computers, answering phones, discussing cases. But as Marcus walked past, a few heads turned. They recognized him, but not as the man Grant had been harassing. They knew him in a very different way, a way that Grant would soon understand. Marcus made his way to the back offices, where a team of senior officers and staff were waiting for him. They greeted him with respectful nods, each one recognizing his authority. Some even smiled, knowing what was about to unfold. Today was going to be a memorable day, not just for Marcus, but for everyone in the precinct. After a few minutes of preparation, it was time. Marcus slipped into his full uniform, a crisp, dark suit with a badge pinned to his chest. He adjusted his collar, straightened his tie, and took one last deep breath. He was ready. He walked confidently through the halls, each step echoing in the large, bustling building. People turned to look, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of him in full uniform. But Marcus didn't stop. He had one destination in mind. Meanwhile, Officer Grant had just arrived at the precinct, completely unaware of what was going on. He strolled in, his usual smug look on his face, chatting with some of his fellow officers. He was in a good mood, feeling as though he had complete control over his little corner of the world. For him, Marcus was just another citizen, a man he could look down on, someone he didn't have to respect. But as Grant entered the main lobby, his conversation came to a sudden halt. He noticed a quiet but noticeable shift in the room. People were looking toward the entrance, their eyes wide with surprise. Grant followed their gaze and saw Marcus standing there, dressed in full uniform, his badge gleaming on his chest. Marcus looked every bit the leader, standing tall, his presence commanding the room. Grant's smirk faded, replaced by a look of confusion, and then, slowly, realization. He tried to hide his surprise, but it was too late. Marcus could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief. Grant's mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked at Marcus, then at the badge, and then back at Marcus, his face turning pale. Before Grant could say anything, Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His calm, steady gaze never wavered. He looked at Grant with a quiet strength, the same strength he had shown all along. But now, there was something more, an authority that couldn't be ignored. "Good morning, Officer Grant," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I believe we need to talk." Grant swallowed, his face a mix of confusion, fear, and anger. He looked around, hoping for some support, but no one stepped forward. The other officers watched in silence, some with barely hidden smiles, others with wide eyes, waiting to see what would happen next. "Marcus, sir," Grant stammered, struggling to find his words. He was completely caught off guard. For weeks, he had treated Marcus with disdain, with complete disrespect. He had never imagined that this man, this quiet, unassuming man, was anything more than what he had assumed. And now, standing before him, was a man who outranked him, a man who held the very authority he had so often flaunted. Marcus didn't let Grant's discomfort distract him. He continued, his voice steady. "I've noticed some issues with your conduct, Officer Grant. Specifically, your treatment of people in our community. I think you and I both know what I'm talking about." Grant's face turned red. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to make excuses, but the words wouldn't come. He could feel the weight of Marcus's gaze on him, the silent judgment of the other officers in the room. He knew there was no point in trying to lie, no point in pretending he hadn't acted out of prejudice and arrogance. Marcus continued, his tone calm but firm. "Respect is earned, Officer Grant, not demanded. And the way you have been treating people, especially in our neighborhood, shows a lack of respect. It shows a lack of understanding of what it means to serve and protect." Grant's shoulders slumped. He looked down, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. He knew he was wrong, knew he had been exposed for what he truly was, a man who used his badge not to protect, but to control, to intimidate. As Marcus spoke, a hush fell over the room. Everyone listened, captivated by the strength in his voice, by the quiet power he held. He wasn't shouting, wasn't angry. He was simply speaking the truth, and that truth was enough to shatter the illusion Grant had built around himself. "You've spent weeks trying to make me feel small," Marcus said, his voice calm but piercing. "You thought you could look down on me, treat me like I didn't matter. But today, Officer Grant, you see the truth. You see who I am." Grant looked up, his face pale. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, anything that would explain his actions, but the words wouldn't come. He could see the truth in Marcus's eyes, a truth that left him feeling exposed, vulnerable. Marcus took a step back, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then he turned to the other officers in the room, addressing them with the same calm authority. "Let this be a reminder to all of us," he said. "Our job is to protect, to serve with respect and dignity. Every person we meet deserves our respect, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from." The officers nodded, some looking down in quiet reflection, others meeting Marcus's gaze with respect. They could see the strength in him, the quiet dignity that had carried him through weeks of mistreatment. They could see that Marcus was more than just a man in a uniform. He was a leader, someone who commanded respect not through fear, but through integrity. As Marcus finished speaking, he turned back to Grant, giving him one final look. "I hope you've learned something from this, Officer Grant. I hope you understand what it means to wear that badge, what it means to serve this community." Grant nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. He knew he had been wrong, knew that he had underestimated the man standing before him. And as Marcus walked away, Grant felt the weight of his own actions, the realization that he had been humbled by a man he had thought was beneath him. The room was silent as Marcus left, the other officers watching him with newfound respect. Some even murmured words of admiration, others clapped quietly, acknowledging the strength it took to endure what he had gone through. Outside the precinct, Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the fresh morning air fill his lungs. He had waited a long time for this moment, had endured weeks of mistreatment, all for the sake of showing Officer Grant and everyone else. That strength didn't come from a badge or a title. It came from within, from the courage to stand firm in the face of injustice. As he walked down the street, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had done the right thing. He hadn't needed to raise his voice, hadn't needed to retaliate. He had simply stood his ground, let the truth reveal itself. And in the end, that truth had been more powerful than any show of force. From that day on, Marcus knew that things would be different. He had proven himself, not just to Officer Grant, but to everyone who had doubted him. He had shown them all that respect was earned through actions, through integrity. And he had earned it in a way that no one could ever take away. As he walked away from the precinct, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his challenge, had stood up to those who had tried to bring him down. And in doing so, he had found a strength within himself that would carry him through anything life could throw his way. He knew that there would always be people like Officer Grant in the world, people who judged others without knowing them, who tried to tear others down to feel powerful. But now, Marcus also knew that he had the power to stand up to them, to show them that true strength came from respect, from dignity, from the courage to be true to oneself. And as he continued down the street, his head held high, he knew that he had won, not just the battle with Grant, but a greater victory within himself. After the big reveal at the precinct, everyone knew who Marcus really was. Word spread quickly. Officers who had looked at him as just another face in the neighborhood now saw him in a new light. He wasn't just Marcus. He was someone with authority, someone they would have to respect. But most importantly, he was someone who had earned that respect, not by demanding it, but by showing quiet strength and resilience. As for Officer Grant, he was left in shock and embarrassment after Marcus's reveal. He tried to go about his day as usual, but it wasn't the same. The other officers now looked at him with judgment, some with disappointment. They had seen how he treated Marcus, and now they understood how wrong he had been. Later that day, Grant was called into the captain's office. His face was pale as he entered, trying to keep his composure. But inside, he knew what was coming. He had crossed a line, and now he would have to face the consequences. The captain sat behind his desk, his face serious and stern, clearly displeased. "Grant, we need to talk about your behavior," the captain began, his voice calm but firm. "We've had complaints about the way you've been treating people in the community, and I've received more details about your interactions with Chief Marcus." Grant's mouth opened, as if he were about to defend himself, but no words came out. He looked down, realizing that he had no real defense. Everything he had done was now out in the open, and he had nowhere to hide. The captain continued, "Respect is a core part of our job. We're here to protect and serve every member of this community with fairness and dignity. Your actions have shown the opposite, and that is unacceptable." Grant swallowed, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. He wanted to explain himself, to make excuses, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. His behavior had been exposed, and now he had to face the consequences. The captain looked him in the eye, his expression resolute. "As of today, you are suspended from duty. There will be an investigation into your conduct, and until we get to the bottom of this, you are not to step foot in this precinct." Grant's face turned red, a mix of anger and shame flooding through him. He knew he had messed up, but he had never expected things to go this far. He thought he could get away with it, thought that no one would ever know about his actions. But now he was paying the price. Outside the captain's office, word of Grant's suspension spread quickly. The officers who had seen him mistreat Marcus felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. They knew that justice was being served, that Grant was finally being held accountable for his actions. When Grant walked out of the office, he avoided everyone's gaze, his face flushed with embarrassment. He could feel the stares of his fellow officers, could hear the whispers that followed him down the hallway. They were no longer looking at him with respect or admiration. Instead, they saw him as a man who had failed to uphold the values of his badge, a man who had let his prejudice cloud his duty. As he left the precinct, Grant felt a hollow emptiness in his chest. He had spent so long looking down on others, so long thinking he was better than the people he was supposed to protect. But now, he was the one being judged, the one being looked down upon. And he realized, in that painful moment, that he had brought this on himself. Meanwhile, Marcus was adjusting to his new role at the precinct. He didn't go around flaunting his authority or demanding respect. Instead, he continued to treat everyone with kindness and understanding, just as he always had. But now, people looked at him differently. They saw him as a leader, someone who had earned his place through patience and strength. One by one, officers came up to Marcus, offering words of respect and apologies for not knowing who he truly was. Some admitted they had underestimated him. Others expressed regret for not standing up to Grant sooner. Marcus accepted their apologies with a quiet smile, his calm demeanor never wavering. One young officer, Officer Harris, approached Marcus with a look of admiration. "Chief Marcus," he began, his voice filled with sincerity, "I want to thank you. You taught us all something important. I've seen how patient you were, how strong you stayed even when things were hard. I don't think I could have done the same." Marcus looked at Officer Harris, his expression warm. "Thank you, Harris. Sometimes, strength isn't about fighting back. It's about standing firm and letting people see the truth. And remember, respect is something we have to show to others if we expect to receive it in return." Officer Harris nodded, clearly moved by Marcus's words. He walked away with a newfound respect for the man who had shown him what true leadership looked like. Over the next few days, Marcus continued to go about his work, always keeping his calm, steady presence. The officers and staff at the precinct began to understand that he wasn't just a man with authority. He was a man who cared deeply for the people he served. He was someone who believed in justice, not just for himself, but for everyone in the community. Word of what had happened spread throughout the neighborhood as well. People who had known Marcus as a quiet, kind man were surprised and proud to learn that he was now in a position of authority. They felt a sense of pride, knowing that someone like Marcus was looking out for them, someone who truly understood their struggles and their experiences. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving the precinct, he saw a small crowd gathered outside. It was a group of neighbors, people from his community who had come to show their support. They greeted him with smiles and warm words, expressing their gratitude for everything he had done. An elderly woman from the neighborhood stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride. "Marcus, we're so proud of you. You've shown us all what it means to be strong, to stand up for what's right. Thank you for being there for us." Marcus smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had never sought praise or recognition, but knowing that his community appreciated him meant more than any title or badge. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to continue serving his community with integrity and respect. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus's influence continued to grow. Officers and community members alike looked up to him, seeing him as a beacon of fairness and justice. His reputation as a man of integrity spread, and people began to feel safer, knowing that someone like Marcus was leading the way. Grant, on the other hand, was dealing with the fallout from his actions. The investigation into his conduct revealed a pattern of prejudice and mistreatment, not just toward Marcus, but toward others in the community as well. It became clear that Grant had abused his authority, using his position to intimidate rather than protect. In the end, Grant was dismissed from the force, his badge taken away. It was a harsh consequence, but one that he had brought upon himself. The other officers saw it as a necessary step, a reminder that no one was above the values of respect and fairness that the precinct stood for. Marcus knew about Grant's dismissal, but he didn't gloat or celebrate. Instead, he saw it as a reminder of the importance of humility and respect. He knew that power could corrupt, that authority could easily be misused, and he was determined to lead by example, to show others that true strength came from kindness, from understanding, from a commitment to doing what was right. Months passed, and the precinct became a place of renewed trust and respect. Officers worked together with a sense of unity, inspired by Marcus's example. The community felt a renewed sense of connection with the police force, knowing that they were being protected by people who genuinely cared about them. Marcus continued his work, always mindful of the lessons he had learned along the way. He never forgot the journey that had brought him here, the struggles he had faced, and the strength he had found within himself. And as he looked around at the people he served, he knew that he had earned their respect in the truest way possible. He had shown them that respect wasn't just a title, wasn't something that could be demanded. It was something that had to be earned, something that had to be given freely. And in the end, he had shown them all that justice wasn't just a word. It was a way of living, a commitment to treating everyone with dignity and fairness. For Marcus, this was more than just a job. It was a calling, a chance to make a difference in a world that often felt divided and uncertain. And as he continued his work, he knew that he would always carry with him the lessons he had learned, the strength he had found, and the respect he had earned. The story of Marcus's journey and his quiet battle for respect and justice left a lasting mark on everyone who witnessed it. In a world where people often expect strength to be loud, where justice seems to favor those who speak the loudest, Marcus's approach was different. He chose a path of patience, resilience, and quiet dignity. He showed everyone that sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that don't shout, the ones that wait patiently until the world is ready to listen. In facing someone like Officer Grant, Marcus showed an incredible amount of self-control. He had been belittled, judged unfairly, and treated with disrespect. And yet, through it all, he held his head high. Marcus knew he could have responded with anger, with frustration. He could have demanded respect or fought back against Grant's mistreatment. But instead, he chose to let his actions speak for him. He chose to let his quiet strength make the loudest statement of all. Marcus's story is a powerful reminder that true strength does not need to be aggressive or forceful. Real strength is found in patience, in staying true to one's values even when faced with adversity. Marcus knew that fighting back in anger wouldn't solve anything, that it would only lead to more conflict. So he waited, staying calm, knowing that in time, the truth would reveal itself. And indeed, the truth did come out. In the end, it was Marcus's calm resilience that exposed Grant's prejudice. It was Marcus's patience that led to justice, showing the world that quiet power is often the most enduring power of all. Marcus taught everyone around him that real respect cannot be forced or demanded. It must be earned through kindness, through patience, and through understanding. The people in Marcus's neighborhood learned a valuable lesson from him. They saw how he endured unfair treatment without losing his dignity. They saw how he responded to prejudice with strength and calm. And they saw that in the end, his quiet patience brought about a change more powerful than any argument or fight. Marcus didn't need to prove himself to anyone. He let his character speak for him. As Marcus continued his work in the precinct, he carried with him this sense of calm strength. He knew that there would always be people who judged others based on appearances, people who underestimated those who were different. But he also knew that there was a greater power in patience, in holding firm to one's values and letting actions show the truth. Marcus's story is a reminder that we all have a choice in how we respond to adversity. We can let anger control us, or we can choose patience. We can let prejudice affect us, or we can choose to rise above it. Marcus chose to rise above. He chose to be a man of strength, not through force or intimidation, but through calm, unwavering integrity. For those who had watched his journey, Marcus's actions were a source of inspiration. He showed them that it's possible to stand up to injustice without losing oneself. He taught them that real justice isn't about getting revenge or proving a point. It's about staying true to who you are and trusting that the truth will come to light. Marcus's quiet strength showed everyone that sometimes the best way to fight back is to stay true to yourself. He didn't need to demand respect. He earned it by being a person of integrity. His resilience, his calmness, his unwavering patience, all of these things made him a man who could not be broken by the prejudice of others. In a world that often rushes to judgment, Marcus reminded everyone of the importance of taking a step back, of looking beyond the surface, of seeing people for who they truly are. He showed them that true power doesn't come from titles or authority. It comes from within, from knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth. Through his journey, Marcus left a message for all who knew him. Respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Strength is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to be seen. And justice may not come quickly, but with patience and resilience, it will find its way. For Marcus, the lesson was simple yet profound. He knew that life would always present challenges, that there would always be people like Grant who judged others unfairly. But he also knew that true power lay in choosing how to respond to those challenges. He had chosen to respond with dignity, and in doing so, he had earned the respect of everyone around him. The people who had once doubted him, who had once looked at him with suspicion, now saw him as a leader, a man of quiet strength who stood for justice and respect. And in the end, Marcus didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had proven everything he needed to, simply by being himself. Marcus's story serves as a reminder to all of us that we can choose how we face the challenges in our lives. We can choose to react with anger, or we can choose to respond with patience. We can let others' judgments affect us, or we can rise above and let our true selves shine through. Sometimes power doesn't need to shout. It waits, silent and patient, until it's time to reveal itself. And those who judge others by appearances, they're the ones who never see it coming. In the end, Marcus showed the world that justice isn't about getting even or proving a point. It's about staying true to who you are, about letting your actions speak louder than words. And when we live with integrity, when we treat others with respect, we create a ripple effect that spreads, inspiring others to do the same. Marcus knew that he had made a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of those around him. He had shown them that justice, real justice, comes from within, from the strength to stand firm in the face of adversity. And that is a lesson that would stay with them, a lesson that would continue to inspire them long after Marcus's story had ended.